a 16-year-old teenager living a reckless life. One day, he stole $140. You'd think in a case like that, even if caught, the punishment would be light. A week, maybe a month in detention, tops. But what that kid never saw coming was that this one theft would destroy his entire life and spiral into events he could never have imagined. Our story revolves around this man, Robert Nelson. Robert was born in Bloomington, California. From childhood, he had a hard life. When he was 6, his mother remarried and his new stepfather started treating him cruelly, abusing him constantly. Naturally, that made him rebel. He started running away from home, sometimes staying out for days at that young age. He learned to steal to survive. Food, clothes, goods from small shops and supermarkets. At night, he'd break into cars just to sleep. His mother worried about him constantly, but she couldn't control him, especially with her husband treating him so badly. This went on until Robert turned 13. Then his mother finally decided to leave that terrible husband after years of suffering. But sadly, even with the stepfather out of the picture, the kid was already set in his ways. He kept causing trouble, kept stealing, kept rebelling. By the way, he loved his mother, and she loved him. But the kid was already addicted to a certain lifestyle and couldn't change. And of course, that led to clashes with the law. Robert went to juvenile detention multiple times during his teens. Most of his sentences were for theft. He'd steal anything he could, and sometimes he'd get caught. All small-time stuff. A few weeks in juvie, then release. But the moment he got out, he'd go right back to it. It was clear he had no intention of reforming. In the summer of 1979, Robert turned 16. He'd just gotten out of another stint in juvenile detention. His mother landed him a job on a cruise ship. He'd work as a waiter. She'd worked on cruise ships in Miami before, so through her contacts, she arranged it. The kid wasn't convinced at first, but his mother pushed him to at least try. She wanted him to get out of the cycle of trouble he kept throwing himself into. After much persuasion, he agreed and decided to go. So Robert had to travel from California all the way to Florida. He took a train, and after a journey of more than 3 days, he finally arrived in Miami. But before reporting for the job, he decided to visit some old friends living there. They hung out reminiscing. During their talk, he told them his mother got him a job on a cruise ship as a waiter. His friends laughed at him. "You're going to go work your ass off on a ship for a lousy paycheck." Robert said, "What else am I supposed to do? I don't have options." One friend said, "Come with us. We'll teach you how to make real money." Then he pulled out a small white bag. They were dealing drugs. Robert was easily convinced. He ditched the job his mother had arranged and decided to stay with these friends, selling drugs in Miami. He dove into a spiral worse than before. He wasn't just selling drugs. He was using them too. Late nights, parties, drinking, debauchery. That became his life. But things were about to change fast. On August 31, 1979, a moment would flip his world upside down. Robert and one of his friends walked into a small supermarket. After grabbing some items, they went to the cashier to pay. But when they reached the counter, they saw it was empty. The cash register drawer was open. Robert looked left and right to see if the cashier was nearby, but the place was deserted. No cashier, no customers. So he decided to reach in, open the drawer, and grab the cash inside. He told his friend to watch the entrance for anyone coming while he scooped up the bills. Suddenly, the cashier returned from the bathroom. Seeing them stealing, she screamed. Robert and his friend bolted, taking the cash with them. The amount was small, about $140, but the cashier stood there in shock, feeling betrayed. She'd only stepped into the bathroom for 2 minutes and came back to find herself robbed. She immediately called the police. A detective arrived, surveyed the scene, and questioned the cashier. She told him, 2 teenage boys entered wearing masks, but the masks were semi-transparent, like thin cloth. She could partially see their faces, their general features. Then one of them pulled out a knife, threatened her, and ordered her to hand over all the money. She said she had no choice but to comply. She also said they cut the phone line, then fled. She was left crying from the shock and fear. She went outside, used another phone to call the cops, and told the detective her story. The detective took it seriously. Armed robbery, even if the amount was small. The cashier's voice trembled. She was clearly terrified. She also said she recognized the boys. She had seen them around the neighborhood before. The detective's name was John Sennott. This was his district, so he knew the local troublemakers and criminals. He went to his car, brought back photos of some teenage delinquents with records, and showed them to the cashier. She looked through them. When she reached Robert's picture, she immediately said, "That's him. That's one of the robbers." The detective recognized Robert Nelson immediately. He'd dealt with him before. Robert had a record. Once, he'd stolen a motorcycle and was caught riding it openly down the street. On top of that, he was suspected of dealing and using drugs. The detective knew Robert well, one of the area's chronic troublemakers. The word spread fast that Robert was wanted. He went into hiding, sleeping at a friend's house and rarely going out. Detective Sennott knew the area and its informants. He contacted one of his young informants, told him Robert Nelson was wanted, and asked him to find his location. A few days later, the informant reported that Robert was hiding at a friend's house and gave the address. An arrest warrant had been issued for Robert, but the detective couldn't raid the friend's house without a separate search warrant from a judge. So he staked out the place. Then he spotted an orange Camaro driving near the house. He suspected Robert was driving it, followed the car, and pulled it over. When the driver stepped out, it was Robert. For formality, the detective asked for his license. Robert showed a fake one with a different name. The detective said, "All right, get out of the car," and handcuffed him. Then he said, "Robert Nelson, you're under arrest for armed robbery." Robert tried to play dumb. "I'm not that person. My name isn't Robert." But it didn't fly. Robert was held in custody pending trial. Unfortunately for him, being arrested in Florida would multiply his problems. Florida's laws are harsher and stricter than California's. One of the things they do in Florida courts is try minors as adults if they have a persistent criminal record, even under 18. Of course, there's a big difference between juvenile and adult sentences, but the decision was made. Robert, despite being 16, would be tried as an adult because of his lengthy criminal history. The system deemed rehabilitation attempts had failed. He was considered incorrigible, so he needed to feel the sting of an adult punishment. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was the charge itself: armed robbery, a serious felony. Robert's trial began in Florida. His mother and sister traveled from California to support him. Initially, Robert thought he'd be charged with simple theft. After all, he stole only $140, and there was no violence involved. He figured even as an adult, the sentence wouldn't be that scary. But he was shocked when he heard the official charge and the cashier's story. A knife pulled on her, threats, and cut phone lines. By the way, Robert's accomplice was never identified. Robert denied the armed robbery. He admitted to stealing the $140, but vehemently denied using a knife or cutting the phone line. He claimed that when he stole the money, no one was at the register. He argued the cashier fabricated the story to cover her own negligence. She couldn't face responsibility for leaving her post, so she invented the tale to shift blame and keep her job. That became the crux of the trial. The case was no longer about the $140. It was about whether the robbery was armed or not. The difference was massive. Armed robbery elevates the crime to a whole new level with severe penalties. Unfortunately for Robert, his criminal past hurt him. The jury didn't believe his story. He was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 25 years in prison. When the sentence was read, Robert was in shock. He screamed in the courtroom, $140. How do you sentence me to 25 years for $140? The kid went insane, and you couldn't blame him. It was a life-destroying sentence. His family was devastated too. It felt like a death sentence. It was a bizarrely harsh sentence. People commit far worse crimes and get less time. But multiple factors converged. He was tried in strict Florida. His record got him tried as an adult, and the cashier's story or fabrication sealed his fate. The kid felt his life had ended. He entered prison in May 1980. And you'd think the disasters ended there? No. He was sent to Sumter Correctional Institution, one of the toughest prisons in Florida, perhaps in all of America. A violent hellhole filled with killers, rapists, and gangsters. Imagine a 16-year-old boy thrown into a cage of lions. From day one, literally, Robert saw a prisoner get stabbed right in front of him. It was normal there. Beatings, stabbings, all forms of violent assault. Robert himself would endure plenty of beatings and sexual assaults. He later said he didn't want to talk about, or even remember, that period. It was that bad. He was constantly beaten, humiliated, and his life was perpetually under threat. Each day was a battle for survival. After suffering through that hell, Robert realized, even if he accepted his 25-year sentence, he wouldn't survive here. He'd eventually be killed. So he decided the only way out was to escape. This thought obsessed him from the very start, but he couldn't find a way for over 2 years. He just tried to endure and survive. We arrive at 1983. Robert is now 19. The prison had 2 sections, one for high-security inmates, long sentences, one for low-security, shorter sentences, under 5 years. Robert was in the high-security wing. During those 2 years, he befriended another inmate named Hebe. Robert shared his escape plan with Hebe. They brainstormed together, looking for a way out. Eventually, they settled on a plan. It wasn't cunning or sophisticated. It relied on speed and luck, but they'd had enough of that place. They decided the escape would be on January 2, 1983. January is bitterly cold in Florida, with short days. After meals, inmates were allowed limited time to walk in the outdoor yards. Robert and Hebe started walking on the path that circled the prison. Their plan: choose a somewhat hidden corner. Climb over the inner fence separating the high-security wing from the low-security wing. This fence was normal, easy to climb, unlike the outer perimeter fence, which was double-layered, taller, and topped with razor wire. By the way, there was no difference in security between the 2 wings. Same guards, same strictness. The only difference was the time allowed outside. High-security inmates got only 2 hours after meals. Low-security inmates could stay out until sunset. Their goal was to get into the low-security yard, blend in with those inmates until darkness, then use the cover of night to escape over the outer double fence. They executed their plan. During that day's recreation period, they went to the isolated corner and climbed the inner fence into the low-security yard. Other inmates saw them, but Robert and Hebe hoped nobody would snitch. Their plan was to blend in until sunset, then try to scale the outer razor wire fence. That itself was a huge challenge. Razor wire, guard towers with armed guards. Since it was a maximum security prison, guards had authorization to shoot any escaping inmate. Their plan could get them killed, but they were determined. Death was better than staying. As they tried to blend in, they got bad news. Some prisoners approached and warned them that one inmate was about to rat them out to the guards. Robert and Hebe realized they couldn't wait until sunset. They had to act now or lose their chance. Immediately, they ran toward the outer fence. It was pure insanity, running in broad daylight, in front of everyone. Guards spotted them instantly. Alarms blared. Sirens wailed. Robert and Hebe started climbing the fence. In the dramatized reenactments, you might see the razor wire low. But in reality, it covered the top completely. To cross, they had to pull themselves over the sharp wire with their hands and bodies. It was agonizingly painful, but adrenaline is a miracle. They were also wearing prison jackets/hoodies because it was winter, which gave them a tiny bit of protection from the wire. As alarms blared, guards raised their rifles and opened fire. Robert's jacket got snagged on the razor wire, momentarily halting him, making him an easy target. But luckily, he yanked it free just in time. After the first fence, they had to climb the second identical fence. More razor wire, more gunfire overhead. By some miracle, both of them made it over the second fence, landing outside the prison walls. Despite the hail of bullets, neither was hit. They ran as fast as they could toward the thick, sprawling forest adjacent to the prison, where they could disappear. Guards pursued them, firing into the woods. Robert and Hebe kept running deeper and deeper into the forest, until, finally, the gunfire stopped. They knew they'd escaped the guards' grasp. What's most amazing? Despite the heavy gunfire, neither was shot. Just a few scratches and cuts from the razor wire. They were euphoric for a moment, but then realization hit. They had no plan after escape, and they didn't even know where they were. Lost in a vast, sprawling forest with no direction. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. They picked a random direction and walked. Through trees and swamps. The journey was brutal. No food, no water, and the January cold was merciless. Meanwhile, authorities tried to track them but lost all trace. Searching that forest was nearly impossible. They didn't even know if the escapees were still alive. They could have been shot, died of starvation, dehydration, or encountered predators. The search didn't last long, but alerts were issued. Robert and Hebe were exhausted, starving. Days passed without any food. Water was scarce. They had to drink from swamp water, which was filthy and dangerous, but they had no choice. Robert later said that in those moments, if he'd seen a cop, he'd have called out to him just to be rescued. He felt death closing in. The worst part, they had no idea how long they'd have to endure this. But they had no options. They kept walking, always keeping the sun on their backs to avoid walking in circles. Before sunset, they'd find a spot to rest. They were always terrified of nocturnal predators or snakes. They walked for 4 consecutive days, each day covering less ground than the previous. Finally, relief came. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they reached dry ground, a flat area, and saw a makeshift tent in the distance made of tarp. Probably a camper, hunter, or someone on a trip. They should have been cautious. Who knows who owned it, or if they knew about the escape. News of their escape had likely spread among locals, but they were so exhausted and hungry, they couldn't think straight. They ran straight to the tent. Luckily, it was empty. The owner was likely away. They found canned food, chips, snacks. They ate like wild animals, having had nothing in days. Then they found dry clothes. They grabbed all the food and clothes and hurried away from the tent. At a different spot, they changed into the clean clothes and rested until evening. Now, having found the tent, they knew they were near inhabited areas. They'd made it out of the deep forest after 5 lost days. As night fell, they found a small hill and climbed it to scan the horizon. In the distance, they saw faint lights, the lights of a nearby highway. They knew that was their direction. They spent the night on that hill. At dawn, they moved toward those lights. After several hours of walking, they finally reached civilization, a highway connecting several Florida towns. They stood by the road, hitchhiking. Eventually, a car stopped. The driver didn't recognize them or hadn't heard the news. Remember, this was 1983. No HD photos, and info didn't spread as fast. Regardless, they'd put a lot of distance between themselves and the prison. The driver was heading to a small coastal town called Zero Beach, far from where they were. perfect for them. They hitched a ride. Arriving in Zero Beach, Robert said to Hebe, "Let's go to the beach." Once there, Robert threw himself into the ocean to wash off the mud and filth. He later said that in that moment, he finally felt true freedom. He could relax and clear his mind after the nightmare of the forest. He, on the other hand, didn't care to wash up. He decided to explore the area while Robert swam. After a while, Robert came out of the water, refreshed, ready to continue anywhere. The world was open, but then Hebe came running back frantically. "What's wrong?" Robert asked. Hebe gasped. "The cops. They're chasing me. They're chasing me." Robert was shocked. "They identified you." He was confused. They were over 250 kilometers from the prison. Locals and police shouldn't recognize them that easily. But Hebe quickly explained, No, nobody recognized me. But I broke into someone's house." Robert stared at him in disbelief. "Are you an idiot? They're fugitives, supposed to lie low. And Hebe just broke into a house." "What happened?" Hebe was walking around, saw people grilling in their backyard, smelled the meat. After days of starvation, he couldn't resist. He tried to sneak in and steal some of their barbecue. The owners saw him and called the cops. He fled and ran to Robert. But before they could move, 2 police officers arrived. The homeowners must have spotted a nearby patrol car, described Hebe and the direction he ran. The patrol found them. The officers ordered them to stop. They addressed Hebe. "You're coming with us for trespassing." One officer took Hebe to their car. The other officer turned to Robert and asked, "Were you with him?" Robert quickly replied, No, I wasn't with him. I was swimming in the ocean." The officer said, "All right. But he's your friend, right? Don't you want to come to the station with him?" Robert said, "No, I barely know him. I just met him today when we hitched a ride together. We're not close." Robert knew this was the end for Hebe. Once they took him to the station and checked his identity, they'd find he was an escaped felon. Robert was now trying to save himself, not fall with his friend. The officer said, "Fine, but give me your ID." Robert was stuck. He made up an excuse. "I left my things on the beach while swimming, and when I came back, they were gone. I think they were stolen, so I don't have my ID." The officer wasn't convinced, but legally couldn't do much. He said, "All right, but come to the car. I'll take your fingerprints, in case any other crimes happened in the area. Then you can go." Robert had no choice but to comply. He went to the car, the officer took his prints and recorded a name. Robert gave a fake one. After that, the officer let him go. Robert immediately got the hell out of that town as fast as he could. He knew. The moment the cops discovered Hebe was an escaped convict, they'd figure out his identity too, and he'd be wanted again. So Robert kept running, trying to get as far away as he could. But in his frantic haste, he darted into a street without noticing an oncoming car. The car clipped him, throwing him to the ground. Luckily, it wasn't speeding. The impact was minor, and he wasn't badly hurt. The driver stopped, about to check on him. But before she could even react, Robert did something completely bizarre. Instead of running away, he got up, walked around, opened the passenger door, and climbed right in. The driver was stunned. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Robert decided to take a wild gamble. He was desperate. He needed to get out of there before the cops identified him and put out a statewide alert. He was willing to try anything. So rather than lying or making up a sob story to gain her sympathy, Robert simply told her the absolute truth. He confessed he was an escaped prisoner. He told her he needed her help to get away. He swore he was peaceful and would never hurt her. All he needed was a little assistance. He begged and pleaded, telling her he'd been sentenced to 25 years in prison at just 16 years old, all for stealing $140 from a supermarket. He gave her his real name, the name of the prison he'd escaped from, and every detail of what happened to him. He said his only goal was to get back to his mother and family in California. The driver, despite the initial shock and disbelief, felt his sincerity. She saw a poor, desperate kid who needed help. He'd managed to move her. She asked, "Okay, so what can I do for you?" He replied, "Just get me away from here. Take me anywhere else." She thought for a moment, then decided to take him to her house. When they arrived, she parked and told him, "I'm going to go inside and call my husband. I'll come back for you. Don't worry. I'll explain that you need help." Robert waited in the car, tense and anxious. He was scared she might change her mind, or that her husband wouldn't understand and would instead turn him over to the cops. He started glancing around nervously, even thinking about jumping out and running. But he didn't know the area and had nowhere to go. So he stayed put, hesitating. About 10 minutes later, the woman's husband came out, got in. About 10 minutes later, the woman's husband came out, got into the car, and asked Robert directly, "What's going on here? Are you really an escaped prisoner?" Robert said yes. The man asked, "And how is that my problem?" Robert replied, "It's not your problem. All I did was try to take my chance at freedom." Then Robert began telling him his story, nervously, afraid this man wouldn't be as understanding as his wife. But as the husband heard the details, he softened. He saw the young kid, heard his story, and felt the injustice. It didn't make sense. A 16-year-old getting 25 years of his life taken away for a petty theft. Finally, the man said, "All right, I'll help you get away. The farthest I can take you is Cocoa Beach." Robert agreed. Cocoa Beach was about 100 kilometers from Vero Beach, a good distance to put between him and the town where he'd soon be wanted. So the man drove him to Cocoa Beach. Before Robert got out of the car, the man handed him some cash and a jacket. "Take this money to help you, and this jacket to keep warm." Robert thanked him with all his heart. He couldn't believe how complete strangers, whose names he didn't even know, had come to his aid. Help he'd never ever forget. Now, the next step, he had to find a way out of Florida. The only destination that made sense was home. Back to his family, his mother and sister, in Fairway, California. They'd visited him in prison maybe once or twice a year, because the journey was long and hard, and travel wasn't as easy back then. It might have been a year or more since he'd last seen them. He missed them terribly, and there was no other place that would take him in this situation. Getting home came with risk. He was a wanted fugitive now, probably with nationwide alerts. California cops might be watching his family's house. These thoughts plagued him. He decided to call his mother, to check on her and assess the situation. He found a payphone and called home. His mother answered. The moment she heard his voice, she was overjoyed. "How are you, son? Are you okay?" He assured her he was fine, that he'd managed to slip out of the cops' grasp. She'd heard the news that he was on the run, but didn't know if he was alive or dead. She'd been worried sick. Hearing his voice was a huge relief. Robert told her he was still in Florida. She urged him, "You have to get out of there. They'll keep looking for you there. Come back to California. We'll help as much as we can." He said that was exactly his plan, but he was scared the cops there might be looking for him. "Have they come to the house? Asked about me? Have you noticed anyone watching?" His mother assured him, No, they haven't come by, no one asked, and we haven't seen anyone watching." Robert felt relieved. Maybe his fears were unfounded. Sure, California had the alert, but it was just a bulletin. They wouldn't actively hunt him unless they had a tip he was there. He felt safe enough to go home without being immediately caught. He said goodbye, told her he loved her, and she told him to be careful. Now Robert needed a way out. He'd come to Florida by train, but now that was impossible. Interstate trains required ID or a passport, which he didn't have. The best option was buses. He took several buses, moving from city to city. state to state. For interstate travel, he didn't use buses either. They also required ID, so he'd hitchhike on highways. Within states, he used buses. At night, he slept in the streets like a homeless person. It was exhausting, but a walk in the park compared to the forest nightmare. After 9 days of non-stop travel, covering over 5,000 kilometers, he arrived in Barstow, California, a small town more like a village. This was where his family lived. He headed straight home. The door was unlocked. He walked in. The first person he saw was his sister. She grabbed him in a tight hug. Moments later, his mother came in. When she saw him, she burst into tears of joy and hugged him tight. It was an emotional reunion. By the way, during his imprisonment, his mother had remarried, this time to a kind, respectful man, completely different from the abusive stepfather of Robert's childhood. The stepfather knew about Robert and expected he might show up. He welcomed him warmly. They all sat around the dinner table, happy, feeling like a family again. In the days that followed, Robert stayed mostly hidden inside the house, rarely going out. California cops weren't actively looking for him. It wasn't their case, but the alert was still there. If he was spotted and recognized, he'd be caught. So he stayed indoors. On the rare occasions he went out, he wore loose clothes, a head covering, and a scarf to hide his face. But living like that was difficult and boring. Cooped up, constantly on edge. After a few weeks, even his family noticed he was getting depressed. One day, his sister Elizabeth invited him to a party to lift his spirits. Robert was hesitant. He wanted to have fun, but meeting new people could draw attention. His sister insisted, and he eventually gave in. At the party, his sister introduced him to her friends. One of them was a girl named Sharon. They hit it off immediately, chatting and feeling a mutual attraction. In the following days, they started going out and fell into a relationship. When Robert felt comfortable enough with her, he decided to open up completely. He told her his whole story, his troubled past, the unfair 25-year sentence for a petty theft, the escape, dodging bullets, surviving the forest, and fighting to get home. Sharon's feelings didn't change. If anything, she was more impressed by his resilience. Then she confessed her own secrets. She admitted she had some side projects and was dealing drugs herself, albeit small time. They were both troublemakers, which brought them closer, building trust. Sharon was 25, 6 years older, and lived alone. Her family was in another city, giving Robert the freedom to stay over sometimes. He started splitting his time between his family's house and Sharon's place. Gradually, Robert let his guard down. Over a month passed without any cops showing up. He started feeling safe, going out more often. He even started working with his stepfather at his plumbing shop, making some money. He was starting to live a normal life again. But what he didn't know was that Florida authorities had not given up. The last place they'd tracked him was when Hebe was caught in Vero Beach. They knew he'd slipped away there. Detectives in Florida strongly suspected he'd left their state and returned to his home base in California. They contacted California authorities directly, urging them to actively search for Robert, not just rely on the bulletin. They specifically asked them to watch his family's house. The California cops, specifically the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, responded. They had his description and photos and started surveilling the house. Robert, completely off guard, was now going out openly and working with his stepfather. He was way too comfortable. On March 4, 1983, just 2 months after his escape, the cops watching the house spotted him riding in a car with his stepfather. After confirming his identity, several officers moved in with weapons drawn, surrounding the vehicle. They pointed their guns at him, ordered him out, and arrested him. "Robert Nelson, you're under arrest." His family came out after hearing the commotion. His mother and sister were devastated, crying as they watched him being taken away. But this wasn't the end. Robert was arrested in California for being a wanted fugitive. But California authorities couldn't just hand him over to Florida without an extradition hearing. A California judge had to order it. So he was held pending that hearing. Bail was set at $50,000, allowing him to be released until the extradition hearing. This wasn't for the escape itself. It was for the extradition process. If he'd been charged directly with escape, there would have been no bail. The problem was where to get $50,000. His mother's love was boundless. She and her husband offered their house as collateral, which the law allowed, to bail him out. So Robert was released and returned home. During this period, his mother launched a grassroots campaign. She wanted to rally public opinion, arguing her son's 25-year sentence was unjust. She talked to neighbors, friends, and local media. The campaign worked. She gathered over 3,000 signatures from people who sympathized with him and felt the sentence was cruel. The goal wasn't to exonerate him. It was to block his extradition to Florida so he could be tried in California, where the laws were more lenient. But 2 weeks later, the crushing news arrived. The governor of California himself signed the extradition order. The escape charge wasn't a game. It was over. The campaign failed. This devastated Robert, his family, and Sharon. He now had 24 hours to surrender to the authorities. Robert decided to spend those final hours between his family home and Sharon's place. He went to Sharon's house. It was somber, like a funeral. They were saying goodbye, knowing he'd likely go back to serve the remaining 23 years, plus even more for the escape. But Sharon suggested he run again. Don't surrender. I'll give you all the money I have to help you get away. Sharon, a small-time drug dealer, had saved a decent amount and was willing to give it all to him. Robert hesitated. Even if I run, where would I go? She said anywhere was better than prison. He thought it over. He remembered the horrors of prison. He couldn't go back. But there was his family. They'd put their house on the line for his bail. If he ran and didn't surrender, the authorities would seize their home. They'd be in huge trouble. Still, he couldn't face prison again. He decided to keep running, hoping his family would forgive him. He also reasoned that the authorities wouldn't just throw them out on the street. There were laws. They'd probably just have to pay the $50,000 bond in installments. Either way, they'd be burdened. But he felt he had no other choice, and he hoped they'd understand. That night before the 24 hours expired, Robert and Sharon slipped away in her car under the cover of darkness. In the following days, they moved between various towns in California. Of course, a new warrant was issued when he didn't surrender. After 2 weeks of moving, they reached Los Angeles, the biggest city in California. Robert felt he could blend in more easily there, especially in Hollywood, where all kinds of people mixed. It was easy to disappear. He rented a small room in Hollywood with Sharon's money. Sharon then decided to go back to San Bernardino to continue her dealing and earn more cash. Their funds were running low. She promised to support him financially. Robert was now entirely dependent on her. He'd cut ties with his family after running. He also got a fake ID made, a driver's license in the name of Lonnie Donovan, and bought a motorcycle with Sharon's money. He'd ride between Los Angeles and San Bernardino to visit her, and she'd always give him money. Sharon loved him deeply, saw him as her life partner, and wanted a future with him. But Robert, still a 19-year-old teenager at heart, didn't share the same intensity. He was grateful and liked her, but he wasn't as committed. Once he felt safe and established in LA, he started living it up. Partying, smoking weed, hitting up wild Hollywood nights, mingling with other girls. He was living a crazy, reckless life while Sharon worked hard, constantly thinking of him and saving every cent from her deals to send his way. This continued for 2 more months, until May 28, 1983. On that day, Robert was speeding on his motorcycle, late for one of his wild parties. He was weaving through traffic recklessly. At a blind curve, he overtook a car. and suddenly, another car was coming straight at him from the opposite lane. Time froze. He knew he'd crash hard. His only thought was to jump off the bike to avoid being crushed. He managed to lift his body, but his legs slammed into the car's front. The impact sent him flying through the air, and he crashed to the ground, hitting his head and blacking out. When he regained consciousness, he didn't feel the pain from shock, but he was lucid enough to know he couldn't stay. Cops or paramedics would come and his identity would be exposed. He tried to get up, but bystanders told him to stay still. His leg was bleeding badly. He looked down and saw the damage. His heel was shattered, and his collarbone was broken too. It was impossible to move. Paramedics arrived and took him to the nearest hospital. He gave them his fake ID. Doctors deemed his condition critical and rushed him into surgery. After surgery, he was placed in a recovery room. He woke up the next morning. His first thought was to get out of there, but the nurses insisted he rest. He couldn't even stand. He decided to call Sharon to come get him, maybe in a wheelchair, even if he had to sneak out. But before he could call, a police officer walked into his room. It was over. The hospital had run a background check after surgery to see if he had insurance. They quickly discovered the ID was fake. Lonnie Donovan didn't exist. Once the injury was from an accident, the hospital was already in touch with the cops. It didn't take long for them to find his real identity as fugitive Robert Nelson. They confirmed it and placed him under arrest, right there in his hospital bed. After several days of recovery, doctors gave the green light for his transfer. He was arrested again, just 5 months after his initial escape. He was held in California, then extradited to Florida. He was tried in Florida once more, this time for escaping prison. He was convicted, and his worst fears came true. An additional 15 years was added to his sentence. He had to serve the remaining 23 years of his original sentence, plus the 15. And with the 2 years already served, his total sentence now ballooned to 40 years. His life was destroyed by the first sentence. The second one completely obliterated it. He was shattered. His family and Sharon were heartbroken. Robert returned to prison, unable to accept it. Over the next 5 years, he attempted to escape 7 times. All failed. The only silver lining: he was eventually moved to a slightly better facility. During his 40-year sentence, he was transferred between several prisons. Finally, Robert was released in 2020. He had served the full 40 years. He walked out at the age of 57. I found his Instagram account. He doesn't post much, but his profile picture said, 40 undone, free at last. One post showed him with his wife, captioned "Love of my life," mentioning they were married and happy. I don't think it was Sharon. She'd be older than him, and this woman looked younger. Either way, it seems he's content to be out, even if most of his life was stolen. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, as always, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. Check out these other cool stories too. Thanks for watching. See you in the